The winter of 1889 brought more than just snow to the Montana Territory. It brought change, carried on the wheels of the Union Pacific Railroad that now connected the remote frontier to the wider world. Among those changes was the arrival of the Chen family, who had worked their way east from California after years of back-breaking labor on the railroads. Li Wei Chen had saved every penny, dreaming of a life beyond the discrimination and violence that plagued Chinese communities in the mining camps. He brought his wife, his aging mother, and his precious daughter, Mei Lin, to the small settlement of Silver Creek, where he opened a laundry and general supply store. Mei Lin was 20 years old, beautiful in a way that transcended cultural boundaries. She had inherited her mother's delicate features and her father's sharp intelligence. But more than her appearance, it was her spirit that set her apart. She had been educated in a mission school in San Francisco, spoke perfect English alongside Mandarin, and possessed a quick wit that sometimes got her into trouble. In Silver Creek, she helped her father run the store, keeping meticulous books and managing inventory with an efficiency that impressed even the most skeptical customers. But life in Silver Creek was not easy for the Chen family. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 had created an atmosphere of suspicion and hostility toward Asian immigrants throughout the West. The Chens faced daily prejudice, customers who refused to be served by celestials, children who threw stones and shouted slurs, and businessmen who tried to drive them out of town to eliminate competition. Li Wei endured it all with stoic dignity, believing that hard work and integrity would eventually win respect. The Chen family's staunchest protector, ironically, became Grandmother Chen, Li Wei's mother. At 73 years old, she was a formidable woman who had survived the dangerous ocean crossing, years of poverty, and the loss of several children. She spoke almost no English but communicated volumes through her fierce expressions and the iron-strong grip of her cane, which she wasn't afraid to use on anyone who disrespected her family. She had very specific ideas about proper behavior, tradition, and most importantly, about who would be suitable for her granddaughter to marry. "No one marries my Chinese daughter," she would declare in Mandarin whenever the subject arose, her wrinkled face set in determined lines. "These barbarians know nothing of respect, nothing of family, nothing of honor. Mei Lin will marry a proper Chinese man, from a good family, who understands our ways." The problem was that there were very few Chinese men in Silver Creek, and most of those were elderly railroad workers or miners with no prospects. Grandmother Chen wrote letters to contacts in San Francisco and Seattle, trying to arrange meetings with suitable young men from respectable families, but Mei Lin quietly resisted. She had seen too many arranged marriages that left women miserable and powerless. She had also seen the world beyond traditional boundaries and wasn't ready to surrender her freedom without at least having a say in her future. Then came Jack McGraw. Jack McGraw was a legend in Silver Creek, though he would have laughed at anyone who called him that. At 6 feet 8 inches tall and built like a mountain, he was the largest man most people had ever seen. He had come to Montana 5 years earlier with nothing but a horse, a rifle, and determination. Through sheer hard work, he had built one of the most successful ranches in the territory, the Broken Pine Ranch, which sprawled across 3,000 acres of prime grazing land. But Jack's size, which made him valuable for hard physical labor, had also made him a lonely man. People were intimidated by him, despite his gentle nature. Women especially seemed frightened, crossing the street to avoid him, whispering about how unnatural his height was. He had proposed to 2 different women over the years, and both had turned him down, one telling him honestly that she feared being crushed in her sleep. At 35, Jack had resigned himself to a solitary life, finding companionship in his horses and cattle, and in the vast Montana sky that was big enough to accommodate even him. Jack first encountered Mei Lin on a cold November morning when he came into town for supplies. He had been buying his goods from the general store run by the hostile Webb family, who overcharged him and made snide comments about his size, but it was the only option in town. When he heard that the Chen family had opened a new store, he decided to give them his business, partly out of curiosity and partly because he had a natural sympathy for outcasts. When he entered the Chen store, he had to duck dramatically to fit through the doorway, and even then, his shoulders barely cleared the frame. The interior was cramped, and he moved carefully, afraid of knocking something over with his enormous frame. That's when he heard a light laugh, musical and warm. "You look like a bear trying to navigate a dollhouse," Mei Lin said in perfect English, her eyes twinkling with amusement rather than fear. Jack turned, startled, and found himself looking at the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. But what struck him even more than her beauty was the fact that she wasn't afraid. She stood there, tiny compared to him, barely reaching his chest, and she was smiling with genuine humor, not mockery. Yes, ma'am, I suppose I do, Jack stammered, feeling his face heat up.
I'm mighty sorry if I'm making a mess of your store.
You haven't broken anything yet, Mei Lin replied. That puts you ahead of 3 customers today. What can I help you find? What began as a simple transaction evolved into conversation. Jack was surprised to find that Mei Lin was knowledgeable about ranching supplies, asking intelligent questions about what he needed for his herd size and offering suggestions based on what other ranchers had purchased. Her bookkeeping was immaculate, and her prices were fair, actually lower than Webb's store. By the time Jack left, he had not only found a new supplier but had experienced something he hadn't felt in years. Genuine human connection with someone who saw past his intimidating exterior. He came back the following week, and the week after that. Each visit, he and Mei Lin would talk a little longer. She told him about San Francisco, about her education, about the books she loved to read. He told her about the ranch, about the Montana wilderness, about the peace he found in open spaces. They discovered shared loves. They both enjoyed poetry, particularly Wordsworth and the nature writers. They both valued hard work and integrity. They both knew what it felt like to be judged for something beyond their control. Grandmother Chen noticed these visits immediately. She watched from the back of the store, her sharp eyes missing nothing as the giant rancher and her granddaughter laughed together over some shared joke. She saw how Mei Lin's face lit up when the bell over the door announced his arrival, how she found excuses to help him personally rather than letting her father serve him. And Grandmother Chen did not approve. That barbarian comes here too often, she told her son in Mandarin during dinner one evening. He looks at Mei Lin with hungry eyes. He's a good customer, Mother, Li Wei replied carefully. His business helps keep this store profitable. And he's always respectful. Respectful. Grandmother Chen's voice rose. He's a mountain of a man. He could break her like a twig. And he's not Chinese. What would people say? What about tradition? What about bringing shame to our family? Mother, Mei Lin is just being friendly to a customer. Nothing more. But it was more, and everyone knew it. Over the following months, Jack and Mei Lin's friendship deepened into something neither of them had expected. Jack began to live for his trips to town, and Mei Lin found herself watching the road, hoping to see his massive figure approaching on his equally massive horse. They were careful, always maintaining propriety, never meeting alone, but the connection between them was undeniable. The crisis came on a spring evening when Jack finally worked up the courage to speak to Li Wei. He came to the store after closing, hat in hand, his enormous frame barely fitting through the doorway. Li Wei invited him in, and Grandmother Chen appeared from the back room like a small, fierce guardian spirit. Mr. Chen, Jack began, his deep voice uncharacteristically nervous. I've come to ask for your permission to court your daughter. I know I'm not what you might have hoped for her. I know I'm not Chinese, and I know there are significant differences between us. But I care for Mei Lin deeply. I would treat her with respect and honor. I would protect her and provide for her. I would spend every day trying to be worthy of her. The silence that followed was deafening. Li Wei looked at his mother, whose face had turned to stone. He looked at his wife, who had appeared in the doorway. He looked at Mei Lin, who stood with her hands clasped, her eyes pleading. It was Grandmother Chen who spoke, her voice sharp and cold as she addressed her son in rapid Mandarin. Tell him no. Tell him no one marries my Chinese daughter to a foreign giant. Tell him we have honor, we have standards, we keep our traditions. Tell him to leave and never come back. Li Wei translated, softening the words slightly but keeping their essential meaning. Jack's face fell, but he nodded with quiet dignity. I understand, sir. I'm sorry to have troubled you. He turned to leave. Wait, Mei Lin said, her voice clear and strong. She spoke in English so Jack would understand, then repeated herself in Mandarin for her grandmother. I have something to say. She turned to her grandmother, her voice respectful but firm. Grandmother, you say no one marries your Chinese daughter to a foreigner. You say we must maintain tradition and honor. But what about my honor? What about my right to choose someone who respects me, who sees me as an equal, who values my mind as much as my appearance? She gestured toward Jack. This man, this foreign giant as you call him, has shown me more genuine respect than any of the suitable men you've suggested. He asks my opinions. He listens when I speak. He doesn't see me as property to be acquired or a servant to manage his household. He sees me as a person. Grandmother Chen's cane hit the floor with a sharp crack. You know nothing of the world. You know nothing of what people will say, how they will treat you. A Chinese woman with a white giant? You will be outcasts. We're already outcasts, grandmother, Mei Lin replied softly. Have you not noticed how people treat us here? How children throw stones. How customers sometimes refuse our service. We're trying to build a life in a place where many don't want us. Jack has never treated us that way. Not once. She turned to Jack, switching to English. You should also know what you're asking for. If you court me, if you marry me, you'll face prejudice too. People will say terrible things. They'll call you a celestial lover, and worse. Your business might suffer. You might lose friends. Are you truly prepared for that? Jack's answer was immediate and unwavering. Miss Chen, I've been alone my whole life because people judged me for something I can't control. I learned that the opinions of small-minded people don't matter much in the grand scheme of things. What matters is finding someone who sees you for who you really are. You've given me that gift. I'd face down a whole territory of gossips for the chance to spend my life with you. Grandmother Chen stood abruptly, her cane trembling in her grip. She looked at Jack, really looked at him, for the first time. She saw the gentle intelligence in his eyes, the respectful way he held himself despite his imposing size, the genuine love on his face as he looked at her granddaughter. She saw, too, the determination in Mei Lin's expression, and she recognized it. It was the same determination she herself had shown when she insisted on making the dangerous journey to America, against everyone's advice. She spoke in Mandarin, and Mei Lin translated. My grandmother says. She says that she has spent her whole life fighting for her family's survival. She crossed an ocean. She buried children. She endured prejudice and hardship so that we could have better lives. She says that she sees strength in you, Mr. McGraw, but also gentleness. She sees that you have also been judged unfairly, and that you understand what it means to be different. Grandmother Chen continued, and Mei Lin's voice caught with emotion as she translated. She says that perhaps she has been holding too tightly to old ways, trying to keep her daughter and granddaughter in a world that no longer exists. She says that in this new country, perhaps there must be new ways. She says that honor is not about following all the old rules, but about treating people with respect and dignity. The old woman approached Jack, who instinctively bent down so he wouldn't tower over her quite so dramatically. She reached up and touched his face with her weathered hand, studying him intently. Then she spoke directly to him in halting English, words she had clearly been practicing in secret. You hurt my granddaughter. I kill you, she said slowly and clearly. Jack couldn't help but smile, even as his eyes grew damp. Yes, Maeme. I believe you would. And I deserve it. Grandmother Chen nodded sharply, then turned to her son and gave a curt command in Mandarin. Li Wei, looking somewhat dazed by this turn of events, cleared his throat. Mr. McGraw, my mother says you may court Mei Lin. But properly, with respect, and always with a chaperone present. Of course, sir. I wouldn't have it any other way. The courtship that followed was the talk of Silver Creek. The sight of the enormous rancher and the tiny Chinese woman together was unusual enough to draw stares wherever they went, but what really shocked people was how clearly devoted they were to each other. Jack would ride into town every Sunday after church, dressed in his best clothes, to take Mei Lin for a carefully chaperoned walk. He built special modifications to his ranch house, doorways tall enough for him but also features at heights convenient for someone of Mei Lin's smaller stature. He learned basic Mandarin phrases, though his pronunciation made Grandmother Chen wince. He studied Chinese customs and traditions, trying to honor Mei Lin's heritage even as he offered her a place in his world. Mei Lin, in turn, learned about ranching and the Montana wilderness. She rode horses beside Jack through his vast property, though she needed a mounting block to get on her horse and looked almost comically small next to his massive stallion. She helped him with the ranch's bookkeeping, quickly identifying inefficiencies and suggesting improvements that increased his profits. She taught him poetry and philosophy, and they would spend evenings reading to each other by lamplight. The wedding, when it finally took place 6 months later, was unlike anything Silver Creek had ever seen. It combined Chinese and Western traditions in a way that was revolutionary for the time. Mei Lin wore a traditional red Chinese wedding dress with phoenix embroidery, a gift from her grandmother, but also carried wildflowers from Jack's ranch. The ceremony included both a Christian minister and a reading of traditional Chinese marriage blessings. Jack wore his best suit, specially made because no standard suit would fit him, and when the time came to kiss his bride, he had to bend down dramatically while she stood on her toes, which made even the disapproving onlookers smile. Grandmother Chen, dressed in her finest silk, stood throughout the ceremony with tears streaming down her weathered face. After the wedding, she pulled Jack aside and spoke to him through Mei Lin's translation. "I was wrong," she said simply. "I thought I was protecting my granddaughter by keeping her in the familiar, by following the old ways. But I see now that sometimes the greatest protection is allowing those we love to choose their own path, even when it frightens us. You have shown me that honor and respect are not bound by culture or tradition. They live in the heart. You have a good heart, Jack McGraw. Too big for your body, perhaps, but good." Jack bent down and, with great gentleness, embraced the tiny old woman who had once declared that no one would marry her Chinese daughter. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for trusting me with your most precious treasure." Years later, when Jack and Mei Lin's children played in the Montana sunshine, beautiful children who inherited their father's height and their mother's features, who spoke both English and Mandarin, who belonged fully to both worlds and to neither, Grandmother Chen would watch from the porch of the ranch house. She would shake her head in wonder at how life could surprise you, how love could break down the walls we build around ourselves, and how sometimes the most unlikely partnerships create the strongest foundations. She had learned that love truly means looking beyond surface differences to see the soul beneath. And she had learned in her 8th decade of life that it's never too late to change your mind, to challenge your own prejudices, and to admit when you're wrong. Jack McGraw, the giant rancher whom she had first rejected, had taught her that. And in teaching her, he had given her family a future she never could have imagined. One built not on old traditions alone, but on respect, partnership, and genuine love. The story of the giant rancher and the Chinese bride became legend in Montana, passed down through generations as a testament to the power of love to transcend boundaries of culture, size, and prejudice. But for those who lived it, it was simply the story of two lonely people who found each other against all odds, and an old woman brave enough to admit she was wrong. "No one marries my Chinese daughter," Grandmother Chen had declared. But Jack McGraw's answer, his patience, his respect, his unwavering devotion, had shocked them all and changed everything.